All right, I think, depending on which clock you're looking at, I think we're getting ready to get started. You can see the slides over there. Of course, if you're watching on the live stream, they should show up on your screen as well. My name's Chris Lema. I'm the VP of Products over at a company called Liquid Web, which is a hosting company. And this morning we're talking about WordPress, online learning, and all the variety of plugins that are out there. I love that we're able to talk about online learning and plugins and inexpensive plugins today. In 1995, I sat in a room. I had just joined Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, Government Research Lab, funded by Department of Energy, 3,500 people on campus, 90, 100 different buildings, and I had joined their training department. And I showed up to a team that was 6 or 7 trainers, an administrator. I was a data entry guy. I joined the lab, and within 3 or 4 months, they announced a budget crisis and a reduction in force, and almost all the trainers, I think all the trainers were removed. The coordinators were gone. There was the director of training, and I was so inexpensive that they didn't fire me because it didn't matter, right? They were just like, oh, the data entry kid can stay. So I was there. I had a boss. We had no training staff, and we were trying to figure out what we were going to do, right? Now, this was 95. We had just spun up this thing called the Information Superhighway in 1994, and I said, why don't we do it all online? And so in 1995, I sat with one of the directors of the laboratory and said, I would like to build an online facility for training our staff. If you have ever considered the dynamics related to, say, a government research facility, they're doing laser work, they're doing cyclotron work, right? Particle accelerators. Safety's a thing, right? And so I created this thing called the Job Hazards Assessment or Job Hazards Questionnaire, and it would ask people questions that would then translate to particular courses they should take so that we could ensure that they were certified and ready to do the work in a safe way, right? I came out of the environmental health and safety space there at Berkeley Lab, and to pitch the director of the lab saying, I want funds to do this, I asked for $2,000 to build the whole thing. Why? Because I needed to buy a digital camera, and I needed to buy some tools. Macromedia had a product called Director that was great for making CDs. For those of you that don't know what CDs are, there's this place called Wikipedia. They may even have a picture of it, but CD didn't do anything, right? Because in that world, right, it was called computer-based training, right? There wasn't learning management systems. There wasn't online learning. It was just computer-based training. You bought CDs in a pack, and then you bought special computers that ran it. And I asked for $2,000 because I wanted to buy some software, a camera. I didn't even include my cost in doing the work because, again, I got paid so little that they were like, that's rounding error, we don't care. So I spent 6 months building what was one of the first and earliest online management systems. That was long before I got involved with the committees to create a standard called SCORM, which allowed us to take learnable objects and move them between places. And then eventually I left to go the rest of the internet world before I circled back because of WordPress. And what's crazy is today, you could spin up a learning site, an online learning site, for less than $2,000, and we're talking about 22 years later. And you go, that's crazy, right? Because it should have gotten more expensive. The technology and everything else, the complexity, all the things you have to do. And you're like, yeah, but I don't have to do half the things you have to do, right? Today, we can just go straight and grab some of the stuff. So this morning, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about online learning and WordPress. And first of all, if you hear me say things like e-learning, online learning, distance learning, mobile learning, online courseware, it's because I like to mess with people, okay? Because you know, someone starts using one term and then I switch to another, and then we're using that one and I switch to another, and they're like, ah. But you go, they're all the same, right? They're all fundamentally the same. And yes, mobile learning is a little different than distance learning, but fundamentally, when we're talking about building solutions for these things, not all that different, right? WordPress today if you're looking at how to do online learning and where it's applied, I want to be clear. I know this is a higher ed focused event, and so you think, oh, Chris is going to explain to us how to build an online university, right? No, it's not what I'm going to do. There are experts that will help you do that, but on the capacity of building an entire online university, a little bit different in scope, but I do want to highlight that people are using online learning for more than just teaching an actual course through a university setting for a student. That is one use case, but it is not the only use case, right? Management training, employee onboarding, scaffolding, and support. And some of you go, what's scaffolding, right? How many of you have ever done a pivot table in Excel? At least once, okay? How many of you today could tell me right now, without looking at Excel, how to do it, right? Other than the geeks in the room, nobody, right? And those are the Excel super geeks, not like to be confused with computer super geeks. So the reality is, because they're all different people have different skills. Don't hate on Excel. So the reality is, we may have done it once, right? But what happens when you need to do it again? For things that are not done regularly, you need just a little bit of help. And it turns out that the people who write the docs inside of Excel, probably not your best friends. So scaffolding is the kind of equipping, the kind of supporting that you can do with an online lesson that may be a video that takes 2 minutes and goes, hey, just a heads up, right? Maybe you never do Excel pivot tables and that example doesn't work right. But if you have ever tried to go, how do I change this one setting on my iPhone? You know exactly what I'm talking about, because you go to Google and you're like, or YouTube, and you go, here, I just want to stop. I don't know if you have an iPhone, and when you turn the phone in certain chat set or in message settings, the whole thing changes and there's handwriting, and you're like, how do I turn that off? You don't need an entire online university for these things, right? It's just scaffolding. It's 2-minute, 3-minute videos. It's little things that say, here, let me help you take this little step. Let me remind you of things you may have forgotten, but it's just enough to get you going. And of course, digital skill development is similar to that. So if you've ever wanted to learn how to do something specific in Photoshop or any other digital tool, right? You go, oh, if I could just learn this skill. So companies are already using WordPress to do all these things, right? I spent about a year off before I joined Liquid Web last year. And in that year, I started doing some management and leadership work with a fairly large organization that was developing their staff. And we started looking at, how do we do management training for their employees, right? How do we help their up-and-coming leaders learn how to have, say, healthy feedback sessions with their employees, right? Because it turns out that's not something you're born knowing. And so little videos and emails and texts that equip and insights and research, all those very easily done in online learning capacity and using WordPress to do so. Why choose WordPress? Well, it's free, if you didn't know already. It's free, and that's awesome. It's also easily customized. We're going to talk about that in a second. There's a whole bunch of pre-made themes, which are the skins that you use. There's a whole bunch of pre-made features, which we call plugins, and tons of folks are already using it, right? But that little asterisk is a heads up, right? And the heads up is that WordPress is incredibly flexible, right? You can do anything you want with WordPress. And so that is its greatest strength, right? Oh, you want to do that? I can do that in WordPress. And you've heard people, you likely may have heard someone say they could do anything, right, in WordPress. Now, the anything needs its own asterisk, right? Because sometimes the people saying they can do anything really just don't have that much of a clue of what all the things are. But still, tons of things you can do. But also, right, that flexibility is its biggest challenge, right? Because you can have developers and or designers and or people who are putting it together just go down rabbit holes for months, and actual business customers come back going, where is my site, right? I thought this should be done already. Or you get 2 different plugins and you bring them together, and it's not like you want them to get married, but you would like them to coexist happily in the context of your site, and they start throwing errors and causing problems, and you go, now I got to go figure out new things. So the flexibility is awesome. The flexibility is the challenge. You just have to know going in that that's one of the dynamics. There are, as I mentioned, tons of themes. This is a single marketplace. In this marketplace, there are over 10,000 purchasable themes, right? And the crazy thing is that you can spend a lifetime clicking through these to look at them, right? I worked on a WordPress website for a very large organization, an enterprise, who said, I can pick any theme? And I said, sure. Well, I'm going to go this weekend, and I'm just going to go find one I like, and then I'll just tell it to you. And I was like, hey, if you want to do it, right? I mean, like, I can't guarantee that we're going to use that code base, but I'd love to know what you like. So we meet on Monday, and I'm like, hey, how'd it go? It's like, I ran out of time. Like, right, because there's 10,000. Well, yeah, and I'm married, and my wife was like, get off the computer, and it's the weekend, and we have kids. And so I was like, yeah, that happens to me too. So 10,000 themes, and this is just one marketplace. There are also tons of, we talked about features, tons of plugins, right? 50,000 plugins. I had my boss years ago when I worked at a company called Emphasis, and my boss says, you want to use WordPress for this? And I said, yeah, I think we could do this little thing. We don't need to buy an innovation platform on the outside. We can do an entire innovation conference just with our internal employees just by using WordPress. We'll build it here. And he goes, okay, are there features for that? Well, there's features for rating and voting. We can put it all together. It's easy. I know how to do it. He goes, WordPress has these things? And I go, yeah, yeah. So I pointed him here, and he goes, oh, there's plugins. I'll just check that out over the weekend. Yeah, good luck with that, right? There's 50,000 of them. Feel free to spend time looking. And when we talk about the university context, right, there are tons of universities, as highlighted in this article from WP Beginner, tons of universities that are using WordPress already as well, right? Everyone's doing it. So you're not going to get in trouble for saying the words WordPress unless you're talking to someone who really hates WordPress. So the core of our time this morning, right, is to talk about plugins and the plugins that provide facility, features for online learning in a way that could help you get started or get you jump started so that you don't have to write all the code yourself. To that end, today, what I'm going to do is walk you through 6. We will spend a little bit of time talking about each one of these. The majority of the time is going to be spent talking about the features that we're using to evaluate, the criteria we're using to evaluate these 6. These are listed in alphabetical order because I don't want to tell you that there's one that's better than another. And in fact, you're likely to presume that simply because one has more features than another, that it's the one that you always want to use. But I can tell you, depending on what you're trying to build, you may want to use one that has less features, or you may not even need one of these, right? And we'll talk about that at the end of this session. All right, so these are the 6, right? What we're going to do is camp out here for just a little bit, right, to talk about these features, because what's important is developing a vocabulary, right? Like if I were to go to YouTube right now and I wanted to change that setting in my iPhone that I mentioned, right, when I turn in a text message, if I turn my phone horizontal, a new screen pops up and there's handwritten notes and I don't know how to turn that off. The problem is I don't know how to say that in YouTube, right? How do I turn off the weird screen that shows up when I turn my phone? That's what happens, right? You go to Google with the wrong question. Well, I will give you one little secret. I now have in Chrome the ability to sign in for me or also sign in for my wife. So, or my kids. So I will pick my wife or my kids before I go do those Googles to mess with their recommendations. I don't do it on Chris Lema because that would mess up mine, right? I can also mess with their Netflix. There's a lot of ways this tip bleeds over, right? It's awesome. It's great. It's live stream too. My wife doesn't watch this stuff, right? So eventually. So the problem is vocabulary. If we don't know the vocabulary to use, right, then we don't know how to articulate what we want, which means we don't know how to evaluate the products that we're looking at, right? So these are some of the criteria that I find most helpful. What's a course prereq? Well, some of you probably know that really easily, right? In order to take this course, and remember, a course can be anything. It can be really big. It can be very, very small. In order to take this course, you also have to have already taken this other course. There's a course prerequisite. You have to be able to pass that course, right, before you come over and take this course. Course prerequisites, there are also, and we'll see it in another one over here when we get into questions, particularly around passing scores and retakes, but course prereqs can also be a quiz, right? Like, did you pass this quiz so that you can then take this next course, right? Then you have lesson timers. Most of us are very aware of what a question timer is because we've taken time tests, right? You take a test and the test is like, hey, you have, this much time to take 30 questions and you walk through it and you go, that's great. But lesson timers allow you to protect your students, and this is the nicest way to say it, protect your students from clicking next before the video's done or before they've spent enough time on the page you want them to, right? So it's very easy for people to be like, oh yeah, I think I already know this next. I think I already know this next, right? And so you can put a timer on the lesson that says, even though there's a 6-minute video, you need to stay here at least 2 minutes or 3 minutes, right? Other people are like, nope, you need to stay here 6 minutes at least, right? So a lesson timer stops people from navigating forward until the time has progressed. Progress emails, right? And we'll talk about gamification in a minute, but progress emails are one of the most helpful ways to keep people engaged, right? What is a progress email? It's the thing that lets someone know, hey, you just passed this lesson. You just passed this quiz. You just took this next piece. Hey, this course is now done. You're on your way to the next stuff. Anything that is email progress makes people go, ooh, yay, right? Nice little chemical release in the brain. They go, I'm moving forward. And the fact is, if you make your lessons shorter and there's more progress emails, right, people feel like, hey, this is awesome. I'm moving through it. And again, we'll talk about engagement and gamification, but it's one of the features that you want. I built a management solution for onboarding and training managers in a company where we started giving them points, right? And again, we'll talk about gamification, but with those points also went the emails. And what was hilarious is a couple of the students started taking it, but the CEO was also in the proof of concept, and the CEO got copies of the email saying, so-and-so has now completed this much, so-and-so has now completed this much. And the CEO was like, what the heck, I'm losing. So he went on and did everything in one day, right? So he could be like, I won, right? And you're like, I love progress emails. Audio, video, embeds, pretty much everybody does this, but the ability to add not just long text, but audio and or video from third-party services like Vimeo or YouTube, any of those like that. And then we get to drip release, right? As much as progress emails are meant to help people move through your content, if you are doing anything where you want to make sure that they are progressing at a certain pace, you may want to delay the release of the next chapter, the next course, the next lesson, delay it until 3 days after they started, and then 4 days after. So if I wanted to delay that CEO, right, I would say, well, you can only do up to the first 3 lessons now. The next 3 lessons appear 3 days from now, and then the next 3. And so you're just spreading it out. And that's a little bit different than a scheduled release, right, which is a scheduled release. The next criteria is one that says this opens up later, right? So these 3 courses open up today, the next 3 open up 2 weeks from now, etc. Question types, right? You want to look at what are the question types that are available for your quizzes, for your engagement, and do they do what you want them to do? In some cases, questions are multiple choice, fill in the blank, etc., and you go, great. Other times, some of these plugins will use an upload as a question type, meaning you want your person to upload some photo, artifact, document. That can be a question type, so you want to look at that. We already briefly hit on question timers, right? So that should make sense. Question banks. It's the notion that you don't want to give the same 4 questions at the end of a quiz, right, or at the end of a lesson, because everyone knows those questions. So instead, you pick 4 from a bank of questions where you have 5 that are in this topic and 5 in this topic, and so it automatically assembles a different kind of quiz, right? Passing scores retakes. Can a person take the quiz again? Can they take the course again? Do they have to pass with a certain score to move on forward? And then course assignments, right? Do you want to let people upload files? Do you want to give them an actual assignment and then put that in the gradebook? Do you want to be able to give them feedback in terms of assignment comments? We talked a little about engagement and gamification, the notion that you want people to be able to feel like they're progressing. And progress often is a function of giving them points, giving them badges, giving them those progress emails, some way to say, hey, you're doing it. You're doing a good job, right? Moving forward. Certificates. Right? Now, I'll be honest, right? I was one of those people who was like, there's no point in certificates. Like, it's like giving my kid a trophy because he participated on the soccer team, and I was like, that's a waste. I would rather he get the trophy when he wins versus when he plays. So I was not a big certificate fan in online learning. And then I actually worked with several companies as we built these things. And everybody came back with the same thing, going, do I get a certificate? And I'm like, did you get a trophy when you played soccer as a kid? Is that what's going on here? But the truth is, people like certificates, right? They like to feel like, hey, I accomplished something. I did something. You can show it to the HR people. Some people, you know, hang it up in their cubicle, what have you. And then the last one is analytics, right? Can you and are you able to monitor all the things? So we've gone through a whole bunch of this stuff and spent a lot of time in what we have is a fairly short amount of time together. So what you're going to see now is that review of those 6 in this format, right? So what's going to happen is I'm going to show you, here's the name of it, LUNCHBOX, and I'm going to tell you, LUNCHBOX does one thing, and it does it really well, which is if your course is just video, if you just have a 6-part video course, but you don't want to stick all 6 just on YouTube and send someone a link to a playlist, you want to put it in a website, and you want full screen video, you want it to look good, and you don't want to spend any time coding, that's LUNCHBOX, right? And you go, hey, that's all I need, right? So if that's all you need, you don't need to spend a lot of time with anything else. You just go, great, let's just use LUNCHBOX and move on from here. Another one that starts off free, though you may end up paying for some of these features, like certificates or something, you might pay for an add-on, but another one is LearnPress. Oh, and by the way, I should mention, because we're getting to the meat and substance of these slides, chrislema.com/WPCampus. That's the URL you want to remember, chrislema.com/WPCampus. The slides are there. So you can download them from there, you can store them from there. So in case you're going, he's moving fast and I didn't get to see all the boxes shaded, it's over there at chrislema.com/WPCampus. So LearnPress is a free plugin, right, on the WordPress repository, and it has many features for free. There are a couple others that you're going to buy a premium add-on for, but you can see it does a lot. If you want prereqs and video and you want drip and you want to be able to ask some questions in a quiz and a certificate at the end, you're going to be happy and fine, right? No issues, you're good to go. If you want engagements though, right, if you want to be able to say, here's the badge and here's the points and here's whatever, you may want to look at a product called SENSEI. SENSEI is originally created out of Woo Themes. When they got bought by Automatic, it's now part of the WooCommerce line. So if you go to woocommerce.com and you look in their products, SENSEI is there. SENSEI also is a plugin that connects into or has an integration with WooCommerce. And so if you were doing something for pay, there's a potential integration there that you might like. But they have engagement gamification. They have certificates. They have a core plugin, which you pay for, but they also have extensions that you may want to look at, right? They have the passing score, the automatic grading, the ability to take retakes. LIFTERLMS, maybe one of my favorites when it comes to engagement and gamification, also how they combine that with their progress emails. They don't have lesson timers, and they're working on question banks right now. And so, you know, and they have a quiz that lets you do an assignment as a question, but it's not a full featured solution. But when it comes to engagement, I think this is where they spent a majority of their energy and effort, and it is a solid product when it comes to progress emails and engagement. So if you're really focused on lots of small lessons, right, and lots of small courses, micro learning, and you want to move people through, you may go, oh, this has enough engagement embedded in that it does the trick for me. Does that make sense? WPCourseWare is one of the ones I use most often. It can integrate with WooCommerce. You'll notice in this whole thing, I don't really attach a lot because of this context for the e-commerce piece, but it has an integration point as well for WooCommerce. It does a whole lot. You can see there's only 2 things. It will let you do kind of a lesson assignment via a quiz upload type, but that's not exactly the same thing. It doesn't have lesson timers. Other than that, it comes full featured, right? Tons of features, single product. You're not buying a lot of extensions or anything else, but it takes care of pretty much everything you want. And so the last couple projects I've worked on, I've been very impressed with how easily I can get up and running with WPCourseWare. And then, of course, the folks that nail it on every front, check every box, plus a couple others, because we didn't put Tin Can API and other, other features in here, right? Also has integration for e-commerce. But the guys that really have just said, okay, and they come less from a WordPress background, more from an e-learning background, and then just really have spent the last several years building up a very impressive WordPress product. LearnDash has all the things you want. So the lesson timers, it also has course assignments. It lets you, as teachers, send back information in terms of assignment comments and everything else. You have all of it in here. But I will say this, right? As I started at the beginning, you just got to know, right, that you're going to be doing a lot more configuration with a product that has a lot more features than with, say, LUNCHBOX that has just video, right? Like LUNCHBOX, you're like, here are my videos, done, check, site's up. LearnDash, you're going to spend a little bit more configuring. It's not that it's impossible, but it's going to take you a little bit more, and you want to use the right tool for the job, right? So those are them. Those are the 6. I told you we'd go fast through this, but we only have a couple more minutes before I open it up for questions. I want to make sure that you get these 10 mistakes not to make, right? So that you can walk away going, oh, this was really valuable because I skipped through a whole bunch of heartache that I didn't want to do, right? So number 1 is you don't just want course metrics, right? You also want what are called cohort metrics. You want to know not just how people are progressing through it, but people that, you know, over the same period of time. Does everyone know what a cohort is? Yeah, most of you. Okay. So if I launch something, right, in January, and then I launch it in March, and I launch it in April, and then I launch it in June, the reality is I have a lot of people moving through this, but that's not enough to say, oh, well, so many people have moved through course 3, or this many people have progressed to here, or these many people are falling off. I also want to know but what's the data look like from the people who start in January versus what the people did in March, right? Now, most of the plugins don't do it, but you can integrate something called Mixpanel into the solution, and that will give you the cohort analysis you want. This is the first warning as it relates to metrics, and it's mostly because after the fact, it's too late to go back and get the data. So if you don't start thinking about it up front and go, I need to solve for this, you're going to be 6 months later in the middle of something, and then someone asks you the question, you're like, I don't know, right? We can start from here, and that's always a frustrating experience. The second thing is performance metrics, right? Performance metrics is not the same as course metrics. Course metrics is how many people are moving through it, how many courses they gotten through, how many lessons they got through. Performance is, hey, when I step back and I look at the entire product that we've built, right? All the courses and all the people and all the things, is it working? Are some courses taught by some instructors, are some video lessons more effective than others? You want to be looking at that. You might look at that in terms of engagement. You might look at that in terms of analytics that you're pulling up at the top. But again, thinking about that at the beginning is way better than thinking about it 2 seconds after the question's asked. Make sense? Oh, we're still on metrics. Project and cost metrics, right? I told you WordPress is incredibly flexible, right? So you're making an investment when you build a site like that. And are you investing $1,000, $10,000, $25,000? Doesn't really matter. I've worked on sites that have cost as little as $2,000 and as much as $600,000. And the reality is, it's not a problem if everybody's on the same page, right? But it is a problem if you're heading towards $100,000 when people thought it was a $30,000 project. So another area to focus on is the project metrics, right? Also, don't forget you have multiple stakeholders. It's really easy in a course online learning environment to think about students. Students. And you go, great. Which instructors are performing better? Well, I don't know. Which courses are doing better? I don't know. The administrator wants to know what's the average grade across all this stuff, or in this department? Well, we don't know. So remember that there are administrators, there are investors, there are instructors, and there are students. A lot of different stakeholders to pay attention to. Don't forget you want to integrate metrics with email notifications. So if, in the same way that we're talking about progress in a course, but if you're doing other things, right, like when you launch a course, or when a course is enrolled well, or when a course starts seeing high attrition, you may want to monitor that metric, but also trigger the email to the right stakeholder to say, heads up, that little course you did on leadership development, or that little course on scaffolding, you got a ton of people dropping off. They do lesson 1, they don't ever do lesson 2, right? Monitor it and then email on. Make sense? All right, don't forget that everyone's using their phones, right? They use their phones all the time. People leave their house, they leave with their keys, right? They leave with their wallet, and they leave with their phones. And these days, Apple's trying to make sure they don't have to have their wallet with them, right? And Ford wants to make sure you don't even have to have your keys, but guess what? They still have their phone. So think about it. When you're designing your site, when you're building your solutions, make sure you're starting from or with an understanding of what's going to happen when someone's on their phone. They're also interrupted all the time. If you have ever tried to read a novel while you have toddlers in your home, there's only 2 kinds of people, right? People who just say no to reading, and people who love James Patterson. Why? Because James Patterson books, like each chapter is 1 or 2 pages. You are always like a femtosecond away from finishing a chapter, right? It works, right? James Patterson, one of the all-time top-selling novelists, right? And you go, why? Oh, because he understands there's parents involved, right? When you're creating courses, create a lot of interrupts, right? First of all, from a brain perspective, it's when people pay attention, right at the beginning, right at the end. So keep it short and just make multiple of them, right? Because they're going to get interrupted. And short videos are cheaper to produce, and they're easier to consume, right? In fact, you don't need big production if your video is only lasting 2 minutes, because you're getting right into the material. But if you're going to spend 35 minutes and hope to God people have 35 minutes, you're going to have to light it up well, and you're going to have to worry about background and distraction and everything else. So shorter is better for everybody. Number 9, everybody needs encouragement and motivation. So those progress emails, gamification, don't skimp there, because everybody wants to feel like they're progressing, they're winning, they're achieving, even if they're not like my old boss who must dominate. Not everyone is born with the domination gene, but everyone wants to feel like, yeah, I'm doing good here. And number 10, don't forget test everything, right? It's really easy to think, okay, I got my videos done, right? But onboarding, signing up, registering, getting that first email, knowing where to go after they sign up, getting the link, making sure the link works. If it's supposed to be protected, making sure the protection is actually working. There's a whole lot more than just the content. And lastly, I told you at the beginning of this, right? You may not even need a learning management plugin, right? So if you just need to protect the content, MemberPress, Restrict Content Pro, and Paid Memberships Pro are all plugins that let you protect a regular WordPress web page that you might still embed a video on, right? So if all you're doing is a video on a page with some protection, you may just use these 3 and be good. Also, if you're just talking about, I don't even need it protected, I just want to create a place where people are able to see this content and learn from it. If you're doing scaffolding, for example, you go, oh, I want everyone to have access to this. Then there are some content plugins like Beaver Builder, which is a page builder, lays out pages. Tailor, which is another, Beaver Builder is my favorite. It is a premium product you pay for. Tailor is a free product. And then Setka Editor is a relatively new product that is less about what happens on pages, more about what happens on posts, right? So lets you do a lot of very rapid content layouts, and they also look good. Also, all those quizzes, all those engagements, anything you're asking people about can come just via forms. Ninja Forms, WP Forms, Gravity Forms are all really great plugins to look at. And one last thing. You don't have to do it alone. There are companies, there are agencies, Zeek, Zao, and Web Dev Studios. Normally, right, when you look in the phone book, which if you don't know what that is, Wikipedia has answers for that. You always start with the A's, so I started at the end with Z's. There are many companies do it. These are 3 of my favorites that I know specifically have done this kind of work, whether it's membership or e-commerce or e-learning. Zeek, Zao, and Web Dev Studios. And also from hosting, I come from Liquid Web, so of course I'm going to tell you Liquid Web is great. But if you're like, hey, I don't want to start a little mini project for 110 or 120, whatever our baseline price is, $120 a month, SiteGround is fantastic at, say, $15, right? And so you go, oh, I'll start at SiteGround. They're friends of mine. They're great. There are a lot of great hosts. There are some others out in the hallway here that also sponsor this event, Pantheon and Pagely, and you can check those guys out as well. But if you're going low budget, you may want to look at SiteGround, and then when you're ready to grow into something bigger, more expensive, but also fuller featured, you may want to check out Liquid Web. And I think that's it for us. We are at 5 after, and I think we have till 15 after, which gives us 10 minutes for questions.
Question.
Yeah.
Knowing that we have enough institutions here, what would you say is the biggest challenge, if you know of any, or you from the room? What are the biggest challenges for institutions that already have a system like a Blackboard or a Desire to Learn versus this and
yeah,
challenges?
It's a great question. So the question is, what are some of the challenges for institutions, particularly higher ed institutions that already have a system like Blackboard, and trying to leverage some of this stuff? And the answer for me is punt the other way, right? So if other people are going, and which is why I did this presentation, if other people are going towards, this is our one main system for online university courses, you go, great, I built up a departmental solution for scaffolding for all of our vacation request forms, or I built a online learning solution for whatever, and you build some other solutions that solve other problems. When I was at Berkeley Lab, there were people that had specific systems for other things, right? And we said, well, this risk assessment thing can fall in just about anything. Let's go build it on the web outside of our internal IT systems, right? I checked just last night to make sure the thing still exists, right? And they're like, oh, not only did it exist, but it went from that little department solution in 2008 to a corporate lab-wide solution, and now as part of the DOE, there's a Department of Energy published book on how to make sure you're doing job hazards assessments to make sure that people are doing, working safe in an environment. So things do take off, right? That, by the way, that very first job hazards questionnaire and online learning at Berkeley Lab, we met with the guys before they were called Blackboard and showed them all the stuff before they created it, right? So we've been playing in that space a really long time. But innovation doesn't always happen all the time, right? And so you end up with slower systems that just kind of take a while and take a lot. Like if you've tried to use Blackboard or you tried to use Moodle for some things where you're like, but all I want to do is load up 10 videos on how to fill out your expense report. And you go, oh, dear God, that's a 6-month project. And you go, oh, no, I just spin up this and get it done. Yeah.
What about digital technology literacy as far as the end user and the instructor?
That's fantastic. The question is, what about digital literacy and instruction for everybody, right? Student and instructor, right? The beautiful thing about WordPress, because it's been around for so long, is that resources exist to develop, and they're learning resources, to develop that literacy that you don't have to recreate. So WP 101, WP WordPress 101.com actually runs on one of these LMSs that I just talked about. It runs on LIFTERLMS. And WP 101 is like 30 or 35. Sean Hesketh, who's a friend of mine and also the CEO, is going to hate the fact that I don't remember exactly how many videos they have. But it's like 30 videos in a LMS that people sign in and they go through the courses and they get emails saying, hey, you just did this and you got that done. So one of the nice things of, as opposed to building your own, right, from scratch, is you're using a platform that already has resources to help train and develop people on.
What about the actual use? So you develop a course.
Yep.
Student comes in. What are you finding as far as?
So depending on the nature of what you're building, so the modified question there is, what about students and their ability in terms of digital literacy to use the course, take the course, right? And I think it kind of, so first of all, most of the courses that we're talking, most of the online learning that we see is predominantly like, welcome with a list of lessons. They click on the hyperlink, which they're very comfortable doing because they don't know the world before the hyperlink. They click on the link, it takes them to lesson 1, it's a video, it's some text, and it's a next button or a complete button. So there's not a lot to master in that dynamic. If you're getting more complicated, right, then inline tooltips and solutions that help that, you guys are they're not really pushing the product anymore. There are products out there that will allow you to do kind of inline tooltips to enhance that. But again, most of what people are building out these days are relatively simple. Yeah, in the back.
So what about a course that's structured for students producing projects?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
All courses are listening to material.
Exactly right. So that's where that one of those boxes that we talked about in terms of course assignments becomes really powerful. LearnDash has a full facility for you not only creating, I'm sorry, the question was a question about what about courses where it's not just about ingesting information, so it's not just about video and consuming it and also taking quizzes. What about when the students are meant to produce product? And that's where LearnDash shines, because they have the ability to define a course assignment, have the ability for students to upload those assignments, and have the ability for you to review those and or comment on them back, right? So there's a back and forth there. And then you had one?
Yeah, I'm looking to build essentially sell courses online, but not actually let the students do the course online. It's actually for a sport facility in our college. So I don't need all of the.
You don't need the courseware.
I don't need the courseware. But
You just need to
manage the attendees, need to manage the instructors, need to manage the facility.
Yeah.
Just for course.
Yeah. Okay. So the question was, what about when you're doing something online that you want the notion of students, you want people who show up, you want attendance, and there's even some facility and resource utilization. You don't need the courses. It's a very interesting question. In the past where I've built those solutions, we've not actually used an LMS plugin, right? We have basically said what you're really talking about is a series of forms, right? There's and forms for different stakeholders, right? So people will register, right? And I can still do e-commerce with that, right? But I can use Ninja Forms, I can use any of those forms that I showed you to do register and collect payment. I can then put that data into something where I create another form that is enrollment or attendance. I can do another thing that shows resource allocation. So there's some ways that solve that online without an LMS. If you're using any of these LMS plugins, you're pretty much overkill, right? Because 95% of what is there, you're not using. Great question. One last question? Yeah.
So obviously with like some of the assignments and kinds of things, there's interaction between students. But with some of these systems you're describing, is there also a way to make sure that if I submit answers to these, I and the instructor are the only ones that see them? And, you know, it's like you were saying.
I'm so glad you asked that question. I'm so glad. So the question was, Chris, has there ever been anyone who has articulated a need? I'm doing this for the live stream to help them. Anyone ever articulated a need for a private area where just the instructor and the student go back and forth and no one else has visibility? Because there's a ton of plugins that will let you do connection into forums, etc. And this is the question, my friend, that I have told the LMS plugin people about for 2 years. So I handle calls on a service called clarity.fm, where entrepreneurs and folks call. I think I may be the third most called person on the network. And a lot of times I get questions about LMS or membership sites, and it's one of the questions I get all the time. And for years, I've been talking to the LMS guys going, why don't you do this? So this last time I decided to do something better than before. So in the past, I talked to one here or one there. This last time, I announced it to all 5 of them and said, I don't know which one is going to become my favorite, but one of you guys better do it and better do it fast, right? Or I'm going to get in the LMS game, build a plugin. And so we have LIFTERLMS that is currently working on it right now. And I saw the actual video. So they're in for LIFTERLMS, they're on the roadmap. For LearnDash, right? Justin, I sat with him and we chatted about it, and he goes, okay, we can do that. Justin sent me the video of it working yesterday. So another reason to look at LearnDash is they are definitely moving in that direction. And I just know from the number of calls I've had over the last couple of years, that is a serious requirement for people. And with that, I want to say thank you very much. You can find me at chrislema.com, where I write. You can also find me online on Twitter at @chrislema. And of course, I work at Liquid Web, a $100 million host that does WordPress, managed WordPress products, but also hosts all sorts of things. So dedicated boxes, VPS, and all sorts of stuff. And before you go, right, there are forms over here that allow you to stipulate that this was the best presentation you've heard in your entire life. If that doesn't work out, you can also mark it best conference. If that doesn't work out, you just go, yeah, he was okay. Either way, I won't see it until you're long gone and I'm long gone, so no stress on your part. But thank you very much. Take care.